I'm hopeful, regardless of the outcome. Boost up positive energy without one. Sorry about the jab, I'm on a holy field. I'm bearing fruit, but demons try to eat them like Yoshi meals. I'll piss them off the Batman like Falcone deals. Jungle full of predators, I know how Mowgli feels. So I got the fire, refuse to live in fear. I can spot suppliers, eating fresh drugs. Call me privately.
Oh yeah, welcome to episode 239 of the Permaculture Pimpcast, where PIMP stands for Permaculture is my passion. The only pimpcast on planet Earth where we discuss permaculture, preparedness, and practical living. And folks, this is one of those very rare episodes where I'm actually going live. And when you hear the import of the information, you're going to know the reasons why. Hopefully we stay live. This episode, as always, brought to you by Hickory Ridge Soap from TwoOldCrowsHomestead.com. Turn that simp into a pimp. Bam! Heaven's Harvest, 10% off with promo code PERMA. Look, handle all your preparedness needs yourself. Everything you can't source, check out Heaven's Harvest. And remember, they're going to hook you up with my discount code. Also, Redemption Shield. I am grounded. I'm G'd up from the feet up every single episode, y'all. You don't believe me? If you're watching live, you see my bare feet, and they're sticking on this grounding mat right now. So I'm always grounded. And given my electrical background, I'd be a doofus not to do it. Also, EMP Shield. $50 off with promo code PERMA. If anything gets Kentucky Fried in your house after a lightning strike, I mean, notwithstanding the EMP thing, but a lightning strike, that's your biggest threat, believe it or not. Anything gets Kentucky Fried in the house, believe me, they're going to cover you for 25 G's. And if you want to tip a pimp, do it over there on the Fountain app. Listen to all your podcasts over there, even triple up the speed. And if you want to drop a derivation of Bitcoin on a playa, they call them Satoshis. So if you want to drop a SAT on a PIMP, you know exactly where to do it. Green Wave Filters, 5% off with promo code PERMA. And then finally, Heaven's Harvest Freeze Dryers. Look, I don't have a discount code. They're already discounted anyway. Just use our link down below. Everybody's wondering in these times how you can help us out. Well, you can go to our website. You can buy our products. We're the world's biggest comfrey dealer. Go buy it over there. It almost sounds like it's illegal these days. If you need the world's best deer repellent, all natural. Yeah, the Permaculture Pimp Daddy himself makes it right here on the Pimpstead at Billy's Jungle Palace of Love. You can get that all at the website and then check out our advertisers. Look, y'all, I'm handling everything up front because I got a guest on today that I've been wanting to talk to for a long, long time. I've been following his research and his work for a very long time. And I just want to tell you why I reached out to him. EJ, one of the guys I met at one of the last homestead gatherings where I was one of the keynote speakers, he wrote to me and says, hey, man, I really wish you'd get Dane Wigington on the show. Well, EJ listens to the podcast often, and a number of other people have been hitting me up about hitting him up. And I'm like, okay, I'll reach out to him. I'll see if he'll do it. And sure enough, I reached out. It might have been a few weeks ago. I had no idea that the calamity was going to unfold right here where I live in Western North Carolina. And here it is. And good night. The timing couldn't be more perfect and tragic all at the same time. So with that said, I'm going to bring on my guest, Dane Wigington from Geoengineering. Dane, I'm sorry, Dane, I'm screwing everything up here. I called you Dean. Sorry, man. All you people look the same to me. Dane Wigington from Geoengineering Watch. I guess it helps if I start out with a little bit of humor after screwing up your name. How you doing, my man?
Good, Billy. I don't laugh much, but you just got one out of me. Thank you.
Don't worry. Hey, the show's early, homie. We're going to get into it, but hey, man, right off the bat, folks, everybody that's on here live, if you can, do me a solid, hit that thumbs up, and then leave your questions after a while. I'm going to take advantage of Dane right up front, but hopefully we get into some of your questions out there. So remember, hit that thumbs up. Tell everybody we're live, because when I told everybody that I was going to have Dane Wigington on this show, and I've been kind of teasing it on the podcast for a while, everybody was losing their mind. You'd think I was having Michael Jackson on this show. And Dane, for all the people that don't know about you, why don't you give us a little, every superhero has an origin story. Why don't you tell us yours, and we'll move on from there.
Billy, first I want to express my gratitude to you and to all your followers for the willingness to address this incredibly dire issue. And I'm simply trying to man the post which I feel I was given and trying to do my part, and I will continue to until my last breath. It's not a job I wanted, and I'm not an activist. I'm not politically oriented. I grew up in smoggy Southern California and worked my entire young adult life to get out of that. And when I finally got to Northern California, expecting clean air, built a large off-grid home, solar, wind, and hydro, and began to I was losing 30, 40, 50%, sometimes 70 or 80% of my solar PV uptake, photovoltaic uptake, from whatever these aircraft were emitting. And I knew this couldn't be just condensation. I had some background in renewable energy. I worked for Bechtel Power Corporation, the world's largest engineering firm, when I was younger. And I began to research the subject of geoengineering. I didn't want to find these elements in my rain, climate engineering fallout. I began to test my precipitation, Billy, and I did find it, starting with aluminum, continued to test for 18 months. At the end of that 18 months, I had single rain events that had as high as 3,450 parts per billion of aluminum. That's toxic rain. So what was I to do? I was restoring habitat here. I'm on the east side of Lake Shasta, Northern California, completely off grid in the middle of the wilderness. But how could I continue to restore habitat while I'm being contaminated from the skies and the entire world with it? So I simply was faced with a choice. And I, of course, made this choice. I've been in this battle ever since, 20 plus years. But I'm extraordinarily grateful to know there's people like you out there, and I'm sure your followers as well. And this is a team effort. All of us spokes in this wheel, all of us necessarily make it roll. And we have to deal with this issue. Quite simply, what's happening in our skies is the biggest hole in the bottom of the boat, greatest threat we face, most immediate threat we face, short of nuclear cataclysm, which even that is tied to this issue. We can get into that in a moment. But bottom line is there's nowhere to hide from this, Billy. Nowhere.
Yeah, talking about nowhere to hide, man. I'm right here in the epicenter of what just unfolded just 30 minutes north of Asheville, and it looks like Godzilla just walked all over this place, not where I am. In fact, folks, as we broadcast right now, I'm having to do it with generator backup. Yeah, we got everything from solar, natural gas, you name it. We're G'd up from the feet up here. Look, I practice what I preach, so we are definitely prepped up, but everywhere around here is an absolutely, Dane, it honestly looks like a freaking war zone, like nothing I've ever seen before. And you had a video that came out the other day, and it knocked my junk into my watch pocket when I saw it, because I couldn't believe that they actually let it stay on YouTube. And B, this isn't the first time I've ever seen you, because I've been following your work for quite a while. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you pointed out exactly the same thing that unfolded during that hurricane that hit Houston. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Hurricane Harvey, you're correct. And we can record this anytime there's a cyclonic rotation that makes landfall, because they do it every time. They leave nothing untouched. We can speculate about the agendas and objectives being carried out, Billy, but the fact that they are absolutely positively steering and manipulating these storms beyond dispute. So again, how absurd is it at this point for the so-called climate science community to pretend that this isn't going on? And what do they blame those frequency transmission flashes on? If you can possibly digest this, they're telling us officially right now the excuse they used to take down our Instagram post of the recordings of that steering. They're telling us that that's just migrating birds taking off all at the same time in perfectly circular fashion around every single transmitter site. That's how absurd this equation is, and the narrative we have coming from the so-called climate science community. So we're the ones we've been waiting for. It's up to us to deal with this issue, and everyone is needed, all hands on deck, to push this issue into the full light of day, brother.
Okay, so walk me through this. For all the people that haven't yet seen that video, first of all, you got to go to his YouTube channel, Geoengineering Watch, or just look up Dane Wigington on, you can see his name above there if you're watching this video, but go to his channel and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. Kind of walk us through what exactly is happening. So let's say a storm's out there, it comes in. Are they creating these storms? I do know this. I can't even begin to tell you the number of people that were sending me emails of the skies, of the tic-tac-toe in all of the skies around here days before this thing actually even hit. And it happened the last couple of so-called hurricanes that came in here. But walk me through what's happening. What are they spraying? And then they're using the towers to guide this thing. For all the people out there that are new to this, and believe me, we're doing this in a visual and audio format, but also it'll be on the podcast. But walk me through what exactly is happening with these storms. So it's out there. Are they making a combat multiplier out of it? I mean, how are all these things working together for the people that are novices out there to this information?
Okay, I want to start with this. The equation is complex. And in regard to the spawning of the storms, the oceans are superheating, and climate engineering is making that worse overall as well. But they can and are manipulating atmospheric pressure zones, which can help to spawn cyclonic rotations. But that's not to say that it won't happen on its own, again, because the oceans are superheating. But what we see them doing now is keeping those storms from intensifying while they're over open ocean too far away from the land-based frequency transmission network. So instead of seeing the already formed, well-organized storms in the middle of vast stretches of ocean, we're seeing them kept disorganized until they get close enough to land. And Billy, you've heard this term a lot lately, rapid intensification, right? We hear it all the time now. So they're keeping them from spinning up to full strength until they're close enough to manipulate effectively with the land-based transmitters. And we don't see the oil production platforms in the Gulf of Mexico getting hit almost ever. They might have a passing fringe of something, but they're spared again and again and again. And yet we have this rapid intensification and this steering of this core of the moisture has just happened in Carolina. And so again, it's the manipulation here is absolutely inarguable. And before I forget, just so the residents of the Carolinas know that there are wheels turning on this situation. I had an hour conference call yesterday with the elected representatives from the Carolinas, both. And I presented data on this issue, and they are absolutely aware and aghast and trying to digest what has just been done to them and their constituents. And geoengineeringwatch.org printed materials is going out to all of these state representatives. Spot fires are burning on this issue. So we're going to stoke those fires. We're working with other states as well. So we can expect the fur to fly hopefully soon. And it has to. That doesn't mean our problems are over, but it means that the first step in the right direction is to push this issue to the full light of day and let the chips fall where they may. The proverbial pitchforks and torches moment needs to happen, needs to come. But they keep these storms weakened until they're close enough to land to steer rapid intensification. Then we see the energizing of the NextRad transmission network, and they're about to upgrade all those transmission sites as well, we believe, to make them even more powerful. That's in the process right now. So they're not done. They're not going to let go of this covert weather weapon with which they can decimate anyone anywhere and then blame it on nature. And in the case of the Carolinas, are there some extenuating potential factors here? Part of the agenda. I don't want to say the only agenda. There's, again, many layers to this, but the lithium scenario there and the lithium mining scenario that's been a source of controversy, the crystal mine there as well, that's now been shut down. And it's impossible to know how many maneuverings are going on behind the curtain. But the bottom line is, and we stand on what we can say definitively at geoengineeringwatch.org, this is absolutely going on. It's destroying the planet's remaining life support systems. Billy, you probably know this, and many of your listeners probably do, but if we take the Amazon forest, for example, it's burning to the ground right now. There's been 45,000 fires this year alone. The rivers are dry. We have inhabitants walking across sand trying to find water and get supplies in the Amazon. And we have the Great Barrier Reef, one of the 7 wonders of the world, is now basically done. And they blame that only on water temperature, but the UV is a core part of that problem. It's frying the coral with DNA damaging spectrums of UV radiation, UVC. Nothing, zero mention of that anywhere. In fact, we're told by some sources the ozone layer is getting better. Ignore your sense of feel, ignore your burning skin, ignore your extremely hot car surfaces, car interiors. Just go with the official narrative. And we have too many people doing that. And geoengineering, again, core causal factor of ozone layer destruction as well. So we're talking about the primary pillars of the planet's life support systems are being annihilated. And that's on top of all the other sources of damage that we're doing. Again, another subject, but we fully acknowledge that at Geoengineering Watch. We've been the most horrible stewards of the planet imaginable. But this intentional intervention, Billy, holds everything in the balance.
Let me back you up a little bit, Dane. When this thing was still off the coast, there were certain people already saying this thing is going to hit Western North Carolina, in particular Asheville. Any other time they're saying we have no idea where this thing is going to track. We have no idea what it's going to do. And here I am at 3,000 feet. And I guess I just had this a coming. and everybody else around here too. Nothing like this in living memory. So, I mean, talk to me about, and to the people out there, we got a couple of rabble rousers in the chat over here, and I'm just going to ignore that and let these people do what they do. I'm not even sure they're real people. They're probably bots or something out there. But the point being, let me get this right. So what role does the spraying have before this thing even came in? Are they using that spraying or particular, you know what I'm trying to say, bro. I can barely pronounce that word. So are they using that along with these towers to entangle itself in the storm and then aim this thing? Based on what I'm looking from your work and then watching your, I mean, good night, man. You got 25 million views on your dimming documentary. Am I getting this right, that they're using those particulars? So basically going in front of this storm or somewhere alongside of it, dropping these dropping the stuff and using the stuff to steer the storm where they want it. Am I getting this right?
It's a great line of questioning. Very important. Thank you, Billy. The nanoparticulate dispersions are used for a number of factors. And what we see in front of this incoming front, you have an AR, an atmospheric river of moisture that's pushing north. And we saw that in the water vapor loops that pushed all the way north to Greenland before that storm even made landfall. So they're using this as a moisture pump, pushing that moisture north. They chemically nucleate it, and that's a core part of climate engineering that only geoengineeringwatch.org is trying to desperately bring to light. That's why we have the baseball and softball size hail all the time now, because they're using chemical ice nucleating elements to create short-term toxic surface cool downs. Also creates, again, the massive hail and ice balls. But as this moisture is pushed north toward the Arctic, they're chemically nucleating this in a desperate, dangerous, and very destructive attempt to try to mask what's happening in the Arctic, even if they have to kill the whole planet to do so. So we have that aspect of this operation, the spraying of that incoming moisture, the ionizing of the air mass, if you will, making it more electrically conductive and more susceptible to the frequency transmissions. All of this a part of this operation, and including even cooling down parts of the southeast. Because what we saw on the departure from normal surface temperature maps immediately after Helene made landfall, you had a cooler than normal section in the southeast while the whole rest of the country was red. While this was happening, we had temperatures, for example, in Phoenix in the southwest that broke the former all-time record for September, not just late September in that day, but all of September, broke it by almost 10 degrees, 9.5 degrees. When you're breaking all-time temperature high records by 10 degrees, you know there's a problem. In Northern California, my forests, which were formerly lush, thriving, and very more wet and growing and what you would picture in a coastal California forest, we have temperatures now, Billy, that were this week at 1 o'clock in the morning, 80 degrees. 80 degrees at 1 in the morning in a forest of Northern California with humidities of about 15%. That's comparable to Death Valley. So people don't realize we have this drought deluge scenario. And as I've stated on so many broadcasts, so many interviews, the drought deluge scenario is the hallmark of climate intervention operations. They control the spigot, although it's a very haphazard control. They are definitely directing and deciding where that moisture goes. Let's back up all the way to the 60s in Vietnam with Project Popeye. They were so successful at controlling the flow of moisture all the way back then that by the 70s, international committees passed INMOD treaties, environmental modification treaties, forbidding weather modification in wartime. And yet you bring that up now, and people, the trolls that you just mentioned might be on some of your threads right now, try to pretend this isn't happening. And on the chemical ice nucleation factor, encourage your listeners to search Chinese scientists create artificial snowstorms. They'll find Popular Science, the UK Guardian, CNN, MSNBC, everybody covered it. It's no secret. They did $1 billion worth of damage to Beijing 2 or 3 times, and then they decided to not talk about it anymore because people, of course, weren't happy. But you bring that up here, and suddenly you're a tinfoil hat wearing fringe nutcase, even though these are patented processes covered by international media. So the bottom line is this is an all-out assault against everything we need to continue surviving on this planet. We don't deal with it, we're done.
Dane, I've looked into your research and I've examined it for myself, and I'm like, man, this guy is spot on. But hey, just let's go backwards for a moment before we go forward, because I do want to hit you up with some of the things that have recently gone I got a couple of penis wrinkles over here in the chat that are basically acting as if this stuff is a bunch of nonsense. How far back, this is a rhetorical question, but how far back has, I'd say not only the US, but I'd say the world government, because it seems to me that this thing has to be coordinated. How far back have they been able to do this? Because if I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure that polecat Lyndon Johnson openly spoke about their ability to do that, but were they able to do this before then?
Absolutely. It appears from all available data that these programs were first fully deployed immediately after World War II. Beta testing was going on during World War II. And for those types of individuals you just described that claim it's normal to see these massive Horizon Trail, we look at the World War II bombers and they did it, so therefore it must be normal. We found, this is in the Dimming and military archives, we found footage of B-17s flying in formation, one aircraft filming another, while the dispersion from the aircraft directly above it was shut off instantly, as if it was cut with a knife. Did that aircraft fall out of the sky? Did he kill all his engines at once? No. He was clearly dispersing into our skies. So bottom line is they had to be beta testing then. There is indications that even during some conflicts in World War II, like the Battle of the Bulge, that there was weather modification involved then. We have patents going all the way back to the 1800s, late 1800s. We have film footage of aircraft, actual film footage of aircraft flying in formation in 1923 with patented dispersion mechanisms on them, dispersing exactly the same trails we see now. And so for people to pretend this is just, quote, condensation or not a dispersion is absolutely ludicrous at this point, Billy. We have up-close film footage of these aircraft at altitude, KC-10s, KC-135, C-17s, nozzles visible, turning dispersions on and off. End of debate. It's happening.
Bam. That's exactly where I thought you'd go with this. So I'm going to dismiss any notion. I mean, I think for any of the naysayers out there, go watch The Dimming. And I think it's game, set, match. I watched it actually twice now. And I'm like, there's so much information in here. And it's unimpeachable at this point. I don't understand how anybody can look at this stuff. And I think that's exactly the world we live in right now, where we're told, don't believe your lying eyes. You know, I can go out here, I can look around me, I can see, you know, I can do the who, what, where, when, why, and how, and figure this stuff out for myself. But everybody, you know, all of the powers that shouldn't be are telling us, you're not really seeing this stuff. It's not really happening. So with that said, I'm gonna dismiss any more of these penis wrinkles that are in the chat, and we're gonna move on to something else. I want to ask you, because other people have asked about it too. Like I said, a lot of the show prep and the questions I'm going to ask you, believe it or not, have come from the audience that knew you were going to be on this show and were saying, hey, can you please ask Dane this? Can you please ask him that? So I'm going to try to get to as many of those questions as I can. And if you want to, and at some point, I want to try to get into mitigation strategies, which, believe it or not, to a certain extent, I'm kind of an expert on some of this, not all of it, but I'd love to be able to, you know, kind of commiserate with you on some of these matters and figure out how we can fix some of it without actually chopping off heads. Some of the other recent things that have gone on, Maui, Acapulco. Do you have thoughts on any of that? I mean, obviously, they're going to tell me, I haven't examined Acapulco, but from the people I know that are down there, or the people I know of that are down there, my understanding is they didn't even know this thing was happening. Then, lo and behold, a Category 5 comes rolling up in there, apparently had no rain with it, laid waste to the entire place. And then, as I understand it, just days ago, something very similar happened again. Do you have anything to say about any of that?
Yeah, they just got hit with Hurricane John. So, yeah, I do have some things to say about Acapulco and Lahaina. And let me back up for a moment to fortify what you stated right before that we are not to believe our lying eyes. So think how absurd this is. We have the entire global climate science community stating emphatically that we need to put jet aircraft in the skies to spray light scattering particles to block some of the sun's incoming thermal energy. They describe exactly what we see. The milky white skies is what we would expect to see. They describe the destruction of the ozone layer, the disruption of the hydrological cycle, everything that's already happening. But yet again, they tell us we're not seeing what we're seeing. What's happening is not really happening. And too many people willing to believe that, so long as the stock market continues to be pumped up to record artificial highs. pacify populations until the moment of impact. We need to wake the hell up, or we're not going to be around much longer. So the bottom line is there's no rational denial of these operations right now. On to Acapulco. Yes, we had an insignificant tropical depression. There was no warnings given. It spun up, rapid intensification to the strongest Cat 5 cyclone ever to hit that part of the world in less than 24 hours. Is it a coincidence that earlier in the year, Mexico pushed back against the notion of doing any climate engineering? Is that just a coincidence? And now we have Mexico hit again. Is it a coincidence that in Dubai, for example, that as soon as they decided to ditch the dollar officially, they get hit with 2 years worth of rain in 6 hours? Is that just a coincidence? So we could go on and on with this. Lahaina, the bottom line is what we need to look at in that situation, because there's lots of internet speculation about a lot of things regarding that issue. Bottom line is, what set the template for those fires to burn with such ferocity? We had a very anomalous high pressure dome to the north of Lahaina, which spins clockwise in the northern hemisphere. And that's exactly signature what we would expect from an ionosphere heater like HARP. That's exactly what they can create. High pressure heat dome in the northern hemisphere. South of Lahaina, we had a very anomalous and long-lasting low-pressure spin, Hurricane Dora. Between those two, not in the immediate wind fields, but in the zone between the two pressure extremes, you create a wind tunnel. And that's exactly what happened. So you create a bellows effect. Whatever started those fires, whatever the source of ignition, that's a separate subject. I want to stress that. Once that fire is ignited, and it was declared flash drought, by the way, another term we hear all the time now with climate engineering, desiccant particles that can dry out atmospheric RH, relative humidity, and create flash drought anywhere they want. So Lahaina was declared flash drought region a week before this happened. We have an incendiary dust. Aluminum nanoparticles are incendiary, so are barium. We have that covering foliage structures, and we have an ignition, and now we have a blowtorch wind, 70, 80 miles an hour, blowing flames sideways. That creates a bellows effect, which creates extraordinary heat, impossible to stop. They blowtorched Lahaina, period. And we see the same thing happening in some of the western forests, that the winds are kicked up, which is absolutely within the realm of known capabilities when you're manipulating atmospheric pressure zones. They can affect convection, which affects surface winds. These are established, recognized, patented technologies. So people that deny this are simply too fearful to face the truth. And there's no shortage of those types of people, Billy. I know clinical psychologists that can't face this issue because it simply doesn't fit into their frame of reality, and they're too afraid to face it. But the bottom line is, again, this is the covert weapon of the power structure, from Acapulco to Lahaina and countless other events like the fires in Canada last year, burned 71,000 square miles last year. That's bigger than the states of Florida or Georgia. So again, what sets the template for these fires to burn with such ferocity? That's climate engineering. Same with the drought deluge scenario. Cannot separate that from these operations.
Man, hey, I want to give a shout out real quick to Somewhere in Texas. Thank you for the $50 super chat. As a ghetto philosopher once said, if you want to break bread, I won't fake dead. So, yeah, keep it coming, y'all. Dane, man, is there any weather, I mean, like any of these events that are actually organic anymore? Because I'm only 54 years old, man, and I'm sitting here. There is nothing that seems normal anymore in terms of the weather. I mean, how much of this stuff is even organic anymore?
None. And here's why. Because now that they have completely derailed the entire global climate system, we cannot say that any particular event would have happened at that place, at that time, and in that way, had climate engineering not intervened with the entire system, the butterfly effect. And yet we don't have just intervention in one place. We have intervention all over the globe. And that's why we have had covert global cooperation with these programs from the beginning. We know from historical data that during the height of the Cold War, we had Soviet weather modification personnel and scientists touring U.S. facilities, and our experts touring their facilities in the height of the Cold War. We have an 800-page U.S. Senate document at geoengineeringwatch.org. Your listeners can search geoengineeringwatch.org, massive Senate document. Important parts are highlighted that specifically call for the intergovernmental cooperation, even between otherwise adversarial nations. It cannot be otherwise. And we know they've cooperated, obviously, on recent health issues, don't we? We're all in bed together on this. It's no surprise. So Again, the rest is just an illusion. But what we have now, potentially, like mafia families that collude and cooperate when there's enough to go around. When there's not, the infighting starts. And so now it appears increasingly our atmosphere is a battle zone, a covert battle zone between nations that have the ability to push and pull on the climate system. And that is a very dangerous equation indeed, Billy.
I want to hit you up about something else, and I got to be very genteel about how I ask this question, because this is something the feds would come kicking in my door if I don't ask it properly. In my former career in the military, we dealt with things like thermite, which back in the day we used to make it. It was 2 parts aluminum powder and 3 parts ferric oxide back in the day when we used it. What this stuff does is beyond imagining. Now, if I heard, and I could be conflating some things here, so correct me if I'm wrong. Phil, absolutely correct me. Basically, from these nanoparticles they're dropping from the sky, it sounds to me, now there's a difference. There's thermite and then there's super nanothermite. I'm not talking about the super nano stuff. I'm talking about thermite in general. Is that essentially, because I'm going to move into more of the permaculture space, which is something I'm really an expert at. It seems to me, I'm looking at entire mountaintops over here. In fact, just one of the towns that just got flattened, Marshall, Hot Springs, those are the 2 that really jump out to me. If you drive through there, entire mountaintops full of pines, and it makes no sense how they're all dead. Makes 0 sense whatsoever. And then some of the fires in some of the places I've worked, like when back when I did smoke jumping for a while in Mendocino, California, I see a lot of parallels from that time into now. And I'm wondering, are they actually dropping thermite out here? Or, I mean, just straighten me out and tell me if I got this all wrong.
Well, it amounts to the same thing. With your background, I didn't realize you had done wildland firefighting as well. We could have a lot to talk about. I've done the same on heavy equipment and also on the ground and hiking out to where smoke jumpers were. And because we've had so many fires in Northern California, you have to deal with this. It amounts to the same thing. When you're dispersing nanoparticle aluminum, freeform aluminum, it amounts to dispersing a portion of thermite, does it not? We saw and filmed over the Paradise Fire in Northern California. You might remember that, how many fatalities there were in the Paradise Fire. We filmed blanket aerosol spraying. This is in the dimming, by the way. Blanket aerosol spraying directly above the smoke bank. What's that about? That's not solar radiation management. That's not cloud albedo enhancement. It's a smoke bank. Why were they dispersing directly above the smoke bank? And now we've seen this routinely in other locations too. This can only be nefarious. In regard to the fires, I would encourage your listeners to search Wildfires Serve Geoengineering Agenda. We found peer-reviewed science study advocating for the intentional incineration of forests to provide temporary cooling. Smoke cools. Many people don't know that. Once you get a canopy up high enough, if the fire burns hot enough, that canopy, that smoke particulate matter can stay aloft for 2-3 months sometimes, circling the globe several times. It migrates toward the Arctic in the Northern Hemisphere because of the Coriolis effect. And so are they trying to mimic the short-term toxic cool-down effects of volcanic eruption by incinerating forests? This science study would indicate the answer to that is yes. And again, regardless of the source of ignition, what's setting the template for these fires to burn with such ferocity? Last year in New York, as that smoke bank from the fires that started in Canada drifted down over New York and was held there, pushed down on the surface from an ionosphere heater-induced high-pressure zone, they can push that air down so the smoke just stays on the surface, which is hugely harmful to the population, as we see increasing study now to confirm how dangerous that smoke particulate matter is. And that cooled those temperatures there 20 degrees plus. So the effect is real, but it's short-term, it's toxic, and it destroys the planet's last remaining life support systems. And let me add this, and I'll give it back to you, Billy. We found a 140-page U.S. military document called Forest Fires as a Military Weapon. And I would encourage people to look at that. And what's most profoundly alarming about that study is there were about a dozen and a half locations in the U.S. that were outlined in that study, including Shasta County, California, where I live. What's that doing in a U.S. military document that advocates for the preparation of forests to burn with immense ferocity, to intentionally create a firestorm with years of preparation. Exactly what we see happening here, cutting off of precipitation, distribution of incendiary particulate matter, everything we see happening. That's a U.S. military document. How much proof do we need before we know that this is a nefarious cancer that is in control, those that print the money, and all of us are not only expendable to that cancer, but as the planet's life support systems implode, we're a rapidly increasing liability to that cancer.
What's the end game? And again, another rhetorical question. I've heard other people like Deborah Tavares and a number of others that say, if you were to do an overlay of all the smart cities, and by the way, I just was made aware that Asheville is now going to be another smart city. How about that? Along with Lahaina and along with some of these others. These are, I haven't confirmed any of this, but is that what the end game is? I mean, talk to me about, I don't know. I mean, I know you expose the science and all this other stuff, but surely, Dane, you have to have an opinion as to what the motive is for these particular areas. Why Asheville? Why Lahaina? Why these places in California? Why these other places throughout the globe? Do you have an opinion on that?
Well, again, there's many agendas and objectives in play, and you have many, even in higher circles of power, that are still delusionally imagining that they can tech their way through this and survive themselves while nobody else does. On the current course, no one gets out alive. I want to make that clear. We're hurtling toward what's known as Venus syndrome. And I realize there are many people still right now trying to convince themselves the planet's not warming. In fact, it's not just warming, it's in total meltdown. That has nothing to do with Al Gore, has nothing to do with the incredibly criminally hypocritical environmental groups, all of whom deny climate engineering because they don't want to lose their 501c3 nonprofit. So we can use any factor we want to decide what's creating the warming. It's obviously everything. Any form of human activity that affects the energy balance of the planet is a part of the problem. But the intentional intervention is the biggest single part. But the bottom line is planet's in total meltdown based on unfiltered frontline data. We're blown past 3.5 C from historical baselines. Even Billy, have you seen, if you look at the global temperature rise map, all official global temperature rise maps, they put the baseline right through the middle of what's already been escalating temperatures for half a century. That's an obvious falsification. You don't start the baseline halfway through the problem. So they mask the true severity of what we've already done to the planet. And if we look at this statistically, in geologic timeframes, the damage we've done to the planet has happened in the geologic blink of an eye. And statistically, statisticians have done the calculations on this. There's zero chance that what we've done is anything other than human activity, every form, including climate engineering. So the bottom line, there's nothing natural about what's happening here, nothing. We've laid waste to the planet in unimaginably short time frames. And if we continue on this, again, this course, it's not centuries out or decades out before we hit the wall. We're there. We're hitting the wall now. Crops are collapsing around the globe. And I want to definitely get your input on that and compare it with certain things we've determined as well. But we have crops collapsing, fisheries collapsing. We have 8 billion people. How do we think we're going to survive here when there's no food on the shelf? We're going to have Mad Max on steroids, and it is so perilously close. And those in power are doing everything they can to feed the normalcy bias in the U.S. population until the last possible second. The often heavily armed U.S. population, by the way, that they purchased in 2012, I believe, 2.4 U.S. official agencies like Homeland Security purchased 2.4 billion rounds, billion with a B, of 40 caliber hollow point bullets. Who do people think that's for? Obviously, if that's plan A and B don't work out, maybe that's plan C. They're preparing. They GPSed everybody's doorstep in 2010. They hiked into my property twice through gates and cameras to GPS my doorstep twice. And when I tried to reach the Census Bureau to get a straight answer, I couldn't, in spite of repeated attempts. So the bottom line is they've been preparing for a long time. When you have a car going 100 miles an hour, i.e. modern industrialized militarized civilization, it's 10 feet from impact into a concrete wall. You can put the brakes on all you want. We're going to hit. And I know that's a very difficult pill to swallow because we've been trained as a society that you have to have a happy ending. Just do A, B, and C, and everything will work out fine. And I would argue this: when you know you've dedicated yourself to the fight for the common good, no matter what your circumstance, no matter what your situation, you know you're on that path. Then however the story ends, it ends well. If you can take your last breath knowing you did all you could. And we need to rely on that kind of philosophy. And if we do that, if we all stand up collectively in spite of the odds, and we apply ourselves to this battle, we may yet accomplish profound good, even at this late hour. Sorry for the rant.
No, I love it, man. I mean, amen to that, bro. You almost had me like I'm in the middle of a black church. You're like, yes, my brother. No, man, I told you I'd make you laugh again. But
I appreciate it, Billy. I do a lot of interviews. You're at the top of your game, brother. You are at the top of your game. I'm so honored to connect with you. Anyway, continue on.
No, it's a joy to be able to hang out with you as well. Dane, we got to start turning the corner a little bit. And what I mean by that is we have record numbers right now tuning in, and the podcast, I guarantee, is going to blow up. It already was when people knew I was going to have you on. And we got to start talking about solutions. I never present a problem to folks to which I don't at least present at least two solutions or a couple of them. Some of them might be a little tangible. Some might feel a little bit out there. But honestly, we better wake up and smell the corruption, or we're all going to fall asleep drinking the hemlock. And we're to that point right now. I mean, you've painted a scenario, and so have I in this podcast, where people say, oh, you're entirely too negative. Well, you forget about the bright side, where I'm usually making a call to action. All right, we got to start talking about how do we fix this? And I know that is a difficult. Personally, well, I'll let you answer that, and then I'll just kind of, comment on the back end of that. But surely you had to have thought about ways in which we can correct this, or can it be corrected? Have we crossed the Rubicon so far that there's no going back?
Based on all available data, paleo data, and compared to previous extinctions like the Pedum event 55 million years ago, Paleocene, Eocene thermal maximum, mass extinction comparable to today's event, except today's event is happening hundreds of times faster than that event, which makes it hundreds of times worse. At face value, it looks bleak indeed. But if we could free the planet up from this intentional intervention, and then we have to focus on many other things as well, all other sources of damage, we need to stop and allow the planet to respond on its own to the damage done. And with your background in agriculture, I know you must revere nature in the same way that I do. It is miraculous beyond any comprehension. And whatever did this, I would argue we may have allies that we can't even begin to imagine in this equation. And if we simply do our part, who can say what's possible, even at this late hour? And we need to operate with that kind of philosophy, because the don't think negative thoughts aspects psychologically isn't helping our situation. If you're standing, example I use often, if you're standing in the middle of the freeway at rush hour, should you turn your back to traffic and try to think happy thoughts? Or should you turn and face traffic and do everything you can to dodge the oncoming semi? And that's the position that I would argue that we're in. So I live for the day to see these programs fully exposed. Again, the pitchforks and torches moment, and everybody involved, not just actively, but passively, from elected officials to media, to so-called science journals and climate scientists, all of those who are actively or passively participating in these crimes or the cover-up of those crimes. I live for the day when populations wake up to what's been done to them and do everything they can to hold all those individuals legally and morally accountable for their part in this. And we just focused on an article in the New York Times, Billy, that's from an author that now implicated Robert F. Kennedy as the conspiracy theorist, now focusing on geoengineering. And they mentioned my interview with Robert Kennedy. They didn't mention me or geoengineeringwatch.org because they don't want people to find a source of credible data. They simply want to throw around the conspiracy theory and chemtrails term and try to muddy the water all they can without providing any factual data. But that specific author, Christopher Flavel, for example, I know for a fact that legions of people are now rattling his cage with emails and the link to the dimming so that he knows that we know who he is and what part he's playing in this crime. And that kind of effort needs to continue peacefully, professionally, letting these people know we know who they are and what they're doing. And when this issue becomes exposed, they will be held legally and morally accountable. And that needs to happen. We need to turn this tide, and we don't have much time to do it, Billy.
Well, the late, great Bill Mollison once said, although the world's problems become more and more complex, the solutions are embarrassingly simple. And it seems to me it's kind of hard to turn the corner on this thing until we stop the hemorrhaging. I mean,
Yes.
if they're going to keep dropping this stuff by the tons and tons, by the billions of tons, it's kind of hard to get ahead of anything until we stop that. So let me take you over to my neighbors in Tennessee. Apparently, they put in legislation to stop the whole chemtrailing and everything that's going on over there. Are you, dumb question, but clearly you got to be aware of that. And has it done any good?
We're working with them. And Representative Monty Fritz, a great guy, very grounded, very honorable. And he did an extraordinary job of getting that legislation passed. We're using his legislation as a template in other states right now. It is symbolic because these are considered national security operations. You can't just stop them with legislation like this, but it put it on the radar. What Monty Fritz did and the other reps in Tennessee put this on the radar, international coverage. And now the elephant in the sky becomes harder and harder to hide for those in power, no matter how much control they have over the matrix media. So now we have other states following suit, and we need as many as possible. We need to approach all these representatives, everybody in every state, but it's imperative. We're playing chess, Billy. We need to play well. We need to play effectively and efficiently. That means using the climate science terms. The chemtrails term, although fine in personal conversation, it is the instant marginalization term when you're talking to media or agencies. So people need to use the climate science terms. They need to present solid data. Geoengineeringwatch.org strives to be the go-to source for credible data. Our 20-page fact and photo summary booklets on our homepage, again, we pass those on for less than our cost of producing and shipping just to get them into circulation. If someone doesn't wake up from that with satellite images that are shocking, you don't need to know anything about meteorology. A copy of the federal gag order, by the way, that's on all National Weather Service and all National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration employees. Why in the world would you gag the weathermen if you didn't have something massive to hide? I had a NOAA scientist in a personal meeting state to my face. We all know what's going on. We don't know what to do. We have no First Amendment protection. That's what we're up against. We need to provide enough cover for these people to come out of the shadows. And if we can put a break in the dam, Billy, if we can just put a break in the dam that they can't plug, we will blow this issue out of the open. We will cause a shockwave around the globe. We will change our trajectory. I'm not saying our problems are over. You can't just undo what's been done. But we could yet salvage some of the planet's remaining life support systems. And that, brother, in my book, is worth fighting for till our absolute last breath. Final example on that note, and that theme, on that motivation that I've used before. If your child was in a burning house and you knew you had almost no chance of saving them, would you not try? Would you not break down the door and go into that house and try, no matter how great the odds were against you? No one would deny that. We need to be that person.
I'm right there with you, homie. I got to say, we do have mitigation strategies. I know that work because we apply them here. We know that through the work of people like Dr. Elaine Ingham, Jeff Lawton, a lot of the other people that are just powerhouses in this space, that if they were to just stop what they're doing, we know that just through something as simple as composting, we can tie up all those toxins in medium and long chain carbonic acids. Now they're still there. The aluminum's still there. All the other junk is still there, but it's essentially made inert just through the power of composting. We know that this can be done. We do it right here, right on my farm. We do this. We can take some of the worst things in the world and tie them up. Elaine Ingham, she's from your part of the country. I mean, she proved, and of course, being a student of hers, I mean, we know that we can do this. We do this all the time with things that are awful, but I don't see how we can actually get ahead until we stop the hemorrhaging. So what can we do? I mean, what can everybody out there, because I guarantee you this thing is going to go far and wide. I can already tell by the people that are in the chat right now. And folks, if you haven't already, hit that thumbs up. Tell everybody out there that we're live, that I'm talking with the great Dane Wigington from Geoengineering Watch. Take this video, send it to everybody you know, especially all the skeptics out there, the people that might be on the fence. And I'll tell you what, the days of darkness have a way of making all of us see the light. And right now, with this unbelievable calamity that has just engulfed about a quarter of the country, there have never been a time in the United States of amnesia where people were more open to hear these ideas than where they are right now. And sadly, it takes a lot of suffering for, to kind of soften people up. We know these things can happen, but Dane, what do people do right now? What are some action steps that all the people, what are the marching orders, man? If you were out here leading this army, and you are, whether you like, I know you don't like to be in this spot, but you are. What are the marching orders that all of us can do? Because right now, my wife and I have already had this conversation where we're going to use whatever position, notoriety, whatever we have right here in North Carolina. And I'm going to beat this thing up one side, down the other. What are the marching orders that all of us should take away right now?
Thank you more than I can say for your rational, realistic perspective on this issue. I am so immensely and deeply grateful. You are completely correct. We have to stop the boat from sinking before we arrange the deck chairs on the top. You're completely correct with that. On that note, back to the playing chess part. We need to play effectively. So you don't run out in the street, point at the sky, and start ranting. That doesn't wake people up. It shuts them down. You pass on. Images are very helpful. Again, just passing on a link. The link we just did in the case of what just happened in your neck of the woods, Billy, the 90-second recording of the frequency transmissions manipulating that storm. Go to geoengineeringwatch.org, grab that link, and share it far and wide. That visual is worth more than anything we can say verbally. And again, the passing on images is so incredibly important. It's a far better key to the door. A picture's worth 1,000 words, as the proverb goes. Yes. And as you start those spot fires of awareness, I would argue we don't need to fight like the British, lining up in big rows and mass organization. That's not effective. We fight like the colonists from behind rocks and trees. You start spot fires of awareness. You stoke those fires until they grow and merge into a blaze that can't be extinguished. And once that happens, again, the fur will fly, not pretending our problems are over, because the power structure then will likely play even bigger cards. And that's where this becomes an even greater threat, different layer. We know in our precipitation tests, they're dispersing amongst aluminum, barium, strontium, manganese, surfactants. They're dispersing polymer fibers and graphene. That's showing up in our precipitation tests. We know both of those elements are used militarily as a biological carrier platform. What's that mean? It means it carries a pathogen from the clouds to the ground. Why is that in our rain? Is that connected to recent years and this spread we've seen of that scenario over 85 countries in 3 days? That's indicative of an airborne dispersion. We own an audio of the world's second most recognized climate engineer, Dr. Ken Caldera. In his words, we own the audio, stating that what he did for the U.S. Department of Defense was to, quote, design ways of spraying pathogens into clouds to infect the populations below. We cannot hide from this. When those in power feel they're losing control, what's to stop them from dispersing something like Marburg or Ebola? Nothing is there. And we don't know what else is in this mix now. Unless you know what you're looking for, it's impossible to find. But you've perhaps seen the foaming rain running down waterways and so forth. Billy, there's surfactants in our rain. And the quote snow, the chemically nucleated cement snow that is completely toxic, which tends to sublimate, by the way. So all this snow you see in California from 2 years ago, the Snowmageddon and everything, the runoff that was expected from that didn't occur to the degree that's expected, because that chemically nucleated material tends to sublimate, converts from a solid to a gas, bypassing the liquid phase to some degree. Dry ice, the extreme form, no liquid, no runoff. But this is not a naturally nucleated frozen material. So again, from every conceivable direction, they are torpedoing the planet's life support systems. And on the soils, and I know now we're in your arena, what we've seen in Northern California, I have the USDA historical baselines in my possession from the 40s, from a contact at USDA. And we've seen, and I know this is going to sound preposterous, but this is measuring with USDA soil scientists. We've seen changes in the surface soil pH value in my region of 10 times plus toward alkaline. From the baseline of our normally acidic soils of 5.4, 5.5, we're getting 6.5, 6.6. Because of this particulate loading in the soils, it's forcing the pH toward alkaline from either side of the spectrum. Nothing grows here. Nothing. Our forests are dying by the day. And the soils, of course, are so parched. 6 months here with no rain, with temperatures pushing 100 for most of that time. Everything's dying. Every fir tree in Western forest is dying. Most recent science study about that was titled Firmageddon. I think that title makes the situation clear. And you simply can't grow anything here between the UV, the toxic soils, and as you said, that mitigation. We must stop this as we're continuing. This is where the equation becomes more complex. As we're continuing to load the atmosphere with carbon, burning 100 million plus barrels of carbon fuel a day, 26 million tons of coal a day, forest burning down, and we're making that rain more acidic in that way. But on the aluminum, it becomes bioavailable in soils at acidity below 5.5, based on the studies we've seen. And so we have all this bioavailable aluminum that, as you correctly stated, even if it's there, as long as it's not bioactive, it's bonded to other elements, it's not a problem. But if we continue to acidify the planet and the oceans and with the burning of carbon, and the precipitation drops below 5.5 pH, and it's keeping this aluminum active, we have a real problem on our hands, because, as I know you know, aluminum is toxic to all life forms, period, no exceptions. And on those trees you said were blowing down, we have peer-reviewed study to prove the effect of aluminum on tree roots causes them to shut down nutrient uptake. The root balls are dying back, just like the crowns are dying back. Wind blows, they tip over.
And that's, at the end of the day, let's say you were to take in myself or my son, who's a consultant, and let's say I were to go to your property, I were to do a soil test, and I were to look at it under the microscope like we do, and I were to look at it, and I would say, okay, let's see what we got here. Nematodes, protozoa, bacteria, fungi. Look at all these numbers and see how, what their ratios are. And then I could probably give you a pretty good idea of what's going on in that soil. But at the end of the day, I could probably, if they stopped right now, we could undo what's already happened, but it ain't doing any good as long as, if I'm putting out what I'm putting out, and then they're going to turn back around and then cover it all up again. Well, it's not doing you or anybody else any good. I mean, I can make a compost tea, spray it up in your trees. We could square that away. And then the first rainfall, well, the tea would stay put because it would actually stick to the leaf. But the extracts and the other things that we would use are basically made useless by the continuation of this. So we have got to get out there and force y'all. Folks, I'm glad Dane came on here, because honestly, if there was ever a kick in the pants that we collectively needed, it's right now. And I think maybe the good Lord made this happen when it did, because when I scheduled you for this show, I had no idea that the things that happened were going to unfold the way they did. And now maybe people are a little bit more receptive to this information and how we better stand up and start kicking some butt. So Dane, before we end here, man, what would you like to leave everybody with, and how can they get a hold of you and watch your work?
Geoengineeringwatch.org. And back to just a final note on the soils, we're seeing no forest floor decomposition of duff here. Nothing. All of it is just building up. There's no more microbial activity. Again, leaves from years past are still sitting there undecomposed. So the bottom line, and if I could add one more thing to this, it's a major factor, again, back to we have to stop it or nothing else matters. VPD, vapor pressure deficit, which our forests have long since lost their forest smell. The stomata on the trees and foliage is shut. They're not respirating. They're not absorbing carbon. They're not releasing oxygen. They're just dormant zombie trees at this point.
Wow.
Trying to survive a little longer. And that's geoengineering. The desiccant particles, when they're applying those under a high pressure heat dome, it drops humidity to 1/3 of the historical norms. Everything shuts its stomata to try to survive. I mean, the conditions are absolutely horrific. And again, the UVC and the UV, extraordinarily high UVB levels are literally burning the Cambrian layers off the trunks of trees from tip to trunk, all the way down. And so again, from every aspect, climate engineering is pounding the nails into our collective coffins. Geoengineeringwatch.org is our website, non-political, no advertising. And on the home site, there's an activist suggestions link describing the strategies that can be used to effectively start spot fires, to stoke those fires, to encourage others to do the same. And I know you know this math, Billy, but if one person introduced credible data to 2 people on the first day of a 30-day month, and those 2 to 2 each the second day, and so on, at the end of 30 days, we're into the millions. That's the kind of exponential equation that needs to happen. And all of us have a part to play in this, Billy.
Well, you just knocked my socks off right there, because if you're telling me that, okay, the bacteria to fungi ratio in, let's say, an open pasture, if it's a good open pasture, is somewhere around 50-50. In a orchard, it should be about a 10-to-1 heavy on the fungal side. In an old growth forest, it could be up as high, or should be up as high as about 1,000-to-1. Now you're telling me leaves and stuff aren't breaking down, bro. That is a calamity. If you were telling me, I mean, that with snowfall and snowpack, I mean, despite what a lot of people think, most of your decomposition happens under snowpack, or at least it should. And you're telling me these leaves are just piling up, or they're not? I mean, I know we were going to end things, but man, you just kind of stopped me in my tracks there. These guys aren't breaking down at all?
No.
Wow.
You can, in the Into the Wild section on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org, there are a couple of my treks into the outback. I was surrounded by wilderness here, to actually document what's on the forest floor and the what's happening with the trees. The beetles being only a symptom. All official agencies blame the tree mortality on beetles, as you know, only a symptom. But no, the forest floor duff is not decomposing.
Yeah, well, they would do well to check out the work of Masanobu Fukuoka. The only reason the beetles are there is because everything else isn't there to keep them in balance. So,
yes.
Yeah. So, man, that sounds like a real mess. Well, Dane, I can't thank you enough for coming on with me, man. We got to have you back on, because I got a whole list of questions here I didn't even get to. I guess this was a good way to kind of, sink the bait. And maybe if you got some time, we can get you back in the future, provided we still got a planet at this rate. I'd love to have you back on in the future.
It would be a pleasure and an honor. Just say when.
All right. Well, thank you so much, y'all. Hey, I want to thank everybody out there in the chat. Hey, y'all. Look, man, I know this was some real heavy stuff here, but you got to hear it. Man, hopefully it was a blessing to you. But remember, spread this stuff out there. Go to geoengineeringwatch.org. Go check out his YouTube. And folks, go check out his latest 90-second video. That I've sent that thing to so many people, and it is, I can't even begin to tell you how many people have woken up, or at least are starting to ask critical questions about this. Look, y'all, you got to stay aware of this stuff. Until next time, stay alert, stay alive.
On the individual, just a carbon copy, true spitting that manicotti. Yeah, I'm talking saucy. All they wanna build is a prison world full of pet Tamagotchis. The kamikaze got me out of body like I'm Goku SS3. They wanna push me to the center like a cell. They wanna spin up at the center of the nexus. Me. They want me to bow down, but I'm a warrior. I'm a warrior. I will never bow down, 'cause I'm a warrior. I'm a warrior. They want me to bow down, but I'm a warrior. I'm a warrior.